Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Archives panel. I will be joined by Menaja Ganesh from the Letterform Archive, Jim Grenser from the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center, and Brockett Horne from the People's Graphic Design Archive. And they will all be giving presentations and more here, and then we will follow that with a Q&A session as well. Anyway, thank you all for being here. It's been a great second day already. I'm so glad that we have our panelists here. Thank you so much for making time to be here and share your insights and resources. I think this is really great. We can talk more about the research opportunities for people interested in learning more about Native design work in history, and then also building the history resources as well. So thank you all so much for being here. And we're going to go right into the presentation by Menaja Ganesh. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all so much for creating the space and sharing the space with us. It's a huge pleasure to be here. And I'd just like to start off with a short introduction before I show some works from our collection. I'd like to open with a quote from a writer, Akwake Emezi, from their most recent book, You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, which is, "Give me an archive of goodness that rots." And in the days leading up to this talk, this was a quote that's been on my mind a lot. And I've been faced with a lot of questions around the origins and establishments of modern archival systems and art institutions, most of which were developed in Europe with their roots in white supremacy, especially speaking to the ways in which works were acquired into museums and displayed in white boxes, completely taken out of their original contexts. All of this has systemically marginalized Native voices, Black voices, and Brown voices. And these institutions, the power associated with them, and the people that have access to them is directly tied to wealth, most often of the times generational wealth, race, and class. The narratives of Indigenous communities were and continue to be controlled by upper-class white people, especially in speaking to how archives and museums have participated in the fetishization and commodification of Native objects, especially just the way they're completely ripped out of their original context and the way that they're perceived by the people who have access to view them. It's important for me to open with this and think about these topics because I myself work at a white-owned archive, which is the Letterform Archive, and so many of these questions are so prevalent to the work that we are doing. And I feel that if we're not critiquing these institutions themselves, then we're not going to be able to do any kind of effective work. And the question of decolonizing archives is constantly coming up, but the main question is, how do we decolonize archives when they have such deep colonial roots themselves? In regards to this talk specifically, as well as with the work that I will be showing, with so much Native tradition existing through oral histories, which have been passed down generationally within communities, with work that is created using organic materials that were not originally created to outlive humans, but rather serve a certain purpose. It just makes me think that why is it important for us to preserve these things that were never made to be archived in the first place? And some answers, I guess, that I've come to just makes me think about the intention behind archiving itself and why do we archive? Why do archives exist? I feel that it is to create something tangible for future generations, creating resources and histories to be passed down, to tell these stories in the manner that they were meant to be told without misrepresenting them. And it's almost just a different way to represent oral histories. And I really believe that archives can be malleable, they can change, and even the objects within them can take different forms and manifest in different manners. So rather than using archives as a way to transcend the nature of time and degradation, maybe instead they can just hold us through all of this. They can provide us with comfort and warmth through our own personal histories. And just to close before I present some work from our collection, I believe that archives have always existed in Native communities where bodies can take the form of archives and communities can take the form of archives, even if these methods of archiving are not necessarily like considered by the institutions where they started. I think it's so important for us to keep remembering that Native communities still exist and they're not extinct in any manner. And that's why it's so important to work with contemporary artists, work with living artists. So I just thank you so much for the space. I'd like to use the rest of my time to showcase some of the pieces that we have in our collection. So I'll just be doing that using this document camera. I'd like to start off with some pieces by Angel Decora, who was a Winnebago artist. When she was very young, actually, before I start this, I'd just like all of you, I'd like to encourage all of you to see the talk that Neben had actually given in collaboration with the Letterform Archive on Angel Decora's work. It's very, very informative, and it helps me tremendously using that as a resource when pulling these pieces together. So this was Angel Decora. She was a Winnebago artist who I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with. And she was a Native artist, educator. She was an illustrator, she was a painter, and these are some of the pieces that we have in our collection. So this piece, this book, Wigwam Stories, we actually have two versions of it. They were both printed in the same year, but they both just have completely different covers. And I'd just like to draw attention to the manner in which she's created these illustrations and created the type to go along with it. So the type and the illustrations are very much interacting with one another in the way that you'll see it does throughout the text as well. So a lot of her illustrations are actually pen and ink. I'll just use this one because I've flagged certain pages that I can look through. So she's created a lot of different forms of illustrations that interact with the text in different ways. So here it's almost framing the text in this manner. And then she's created a lot of like title letters. So the way the letter forms themselves interact with the illustrations is especially beautiful to me because it's just a way of like starting the text out and giving a sense of what the story is conveying. Here we have another letter T that she's created to work with this basket. Here we have another one. We have a painting that she had done over here that takes up the entire page, as well as another title illustration that she did to open the story. One thing that's really interesting to me about her illustrations is the way that she really plays around with the negative and positive space, the way she plays around with borders. So this image is, it's only showing like a fragment of this illustration contained within a border, but it really gives us a good sense of what the story itself is going to be talking about. And then we have some more captions from her. Here, the way the letter form, like the letter A is created with these branch or stick-like forms, is almost like an opening for the wolf that is emerging from within it. And I remember this image specifically from Neben's talk as well. I think is so beautiful. I like that it's not really contained within any kind of border or anything like that. It plays around with the space, it plays around with the openness of the page, which I think is very, very beautiful. And then another thing I'd like to draw attention to in Angel Decora's work is the use of lettering and the use of borders. So this border, we don't see a lot of works of hers in color, but I love how this border in this bright orange, it really stands out, but it also contains the text within it that tells us what the book itself is about. And yeah, it's just really beautiful. Like even if you see the type, the way the type is almost like influenced by the border design, it's very geometric and yeah, it's very like sculptural in that manner too. And then we also have the Indians book where Angel Decora did the illustration for the cover, as well as some of the lettering inside, and she did like another set of illustrations. And we don't have a lot of works by her in color, which is why it's nice to see the way that the color is interacting with the black and white work in this one. And the use of color is done so sparingly as well, I feel, which is something to really keep in mind, because it really highlights the text and it highlights what the book is about. It highlights all the information within it. So I think it's really nice to look at these like in conjunction with one another to see the way that she uses color as well. Now I'd like to move on to some works by a contemporary artist who actually presented at this panel, Wes Harmon. So these are some works that we've recently acquired by them. And the thing that stands out to me specifically about these is the purpose of these. So here we have three different things. We have a sign, and then we have a patch, and we have a sticker. And this just makes me think back to the purpose of these works and why they were created and what the original use of them is. So when we look at like a sticker and when we look at a patch, these are things that are like really meant to be out in the world. Like they're meant to exist as multiples, you know, like this one would probably be a wearable, like someone could have it on their body and kind of walk out into the world with it. And even with stickers, I feel like they can really, like the power of stickers comes from like how they can populate a certain space. So it's interesting to look at them just as individual objects that aren't really in use yet, you know, but it's also, I think, important to think about how the message changes or how the message can be made more effective when it is out into the world and when it is like used in the manner that it was meant to, like, especially with the messages that these say, like these pieces, these two say land back, and this one says warning unceded territory. Conduct yourself accordingly. And these are really powerful messages. They don't hold back. Like it really is meant to make us think about like, where are we? Like, you know, like what spaces are we occupying? What lands are we occupying? And yeah, I would love to see these out into the world as well. Like it's interesting because I feel like we're constantly grappling with these thoughts about like, how do these works change when they are within the context of a gallery, when they're on the walls, when they're inside a vitrine that can't really be touched. But like these pieces are protest in themselves, you know, like if I saw, like if this was like on someone's jacket and they were walking out into the world, like they're making a certain statement. So I think it's really important to think about the context of the pieces as well. And then we also have this more larger format piece. Like to draw attention to Salmon Run, the beautiful lettering. So this is actually an anthology newspaper that was created by Cold Falls with featuring work by 12 different artists from the BC area of Canada. And it really just changes the way that you can interact with them when they're at such a large scale. It's very immersive in a manner. And it's cool because it really contains work from so many different artists, and actually all their information about the creators is on the back. So yeah, like different scales of pieces as well. And then some more works by Sebastian Aubin, who is also a part of this conference. I feel so blessed to be able to like interact with their work in such a physical way. And so we have a couple of exhibition catalogs, and then we have this poetry book. They all work with different Native artists. And with the poetry book specifically, like I just want to draw attention to how expressive the type itself is when, like in the context of the poems, in the context of what they're trying to talk about, the way that it plays with space, the way that it's just black and white, but it's so expressive in that manner, playing with scale, playing with size of type, playing with the type treatment, the way it bleeds off the page. And then even with these exhibition catalogs, if you can see, there's like some embossing on the cover. And then the way the images take up space and they're really allowed to breathe. And I feel that like the way it even plays around with humor is really interesting to me, and the materiality of the text itself, very, very beautiful, very expressive. So many exhibition catalogs, I think, when we look at it in a more like traditional sense, like they're kind of so like cut and dry. But here, like it really evokes like the sense of performance, which is prevalent in so many of these pieces. And that's a huge challenge to do through a book. I'd like to draw attention to the binding as well. I know I don't have a ton of time left. I did have a few more pieces, but I think I'll close with just one more really quickly. So this is actually a very, very large scale piece by Brian Tripp, who is unfortunately no longer with us, but it actually opens out into a big accordion piece, and a lot of his works this was just like a part of his daily life when he would work with like these newspapers. If you see, it's like the stock market pages from the newspapers. So it's like a very direct critique on capitalism. And these interventions through the works, I think, are so important it's just so important to think about like the idea of wealth and the idea of capitalism and the violence within that. So I just want to flip through this book really quickly. We're so blessed to have this in our space. So just to end, like I just want to kind of close on the idea that the main goal of our archive is to be an educational resource. It is meant to make work accessible to everyone. And the way that we can do this is by working directly with artists to make sure their work is represented appropriately. And our archive is a living archive. It's not just an archive of relics. So we really think it's important to take this responsibility and work directly with artists and let them have the same autonomy in the way that the conversations around their work take place, to really create a fertile ground for dialogue, for discussion, to have the agency over like the home in which their works live. And we do this through exhibitions, through working with outside curators, like not letting everything be so internal, even through the programming, like engaging in dialogue the way we are today. So yeah, thank you so much for this platform, and thank you so much for giving me a moment to share some of our archive with you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I'm like personally excited to see some of what you all have. I didn't know about some of this. And that last piece, was just really kind of interesting. Yeah, a lot of food for thought. And I definitely appreciate you kind of talking about context and also like individuals as living archives and like thinking of the reframe, right? Thanks so much for, pointing out all these issues. It's great presentation. Love seeing, flipping through the pages. Like that's like a great way to show stuff. So I'm really glad you suggested that. Even seeing Sebastian's work too, like I've admired his designs on like the websites and everything. So it's really great to see that for sure. I'm going to do a little plug for myself really quick.
Please.
So I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, it's out of focus.
There we go. Oh gosh. But I have a couple of stuff from Angel Decora that I've like photographed and scanned and stuff like that. So if somebody is wanting to do a little more research, send me a note. I will share my files with you. I also have like this one Harper's New Monthly Magazine illustrations that are in here from Angel Decora from a story. So just FYI, if anybody's really interested in that. And then enough about me. We will be moving on next to Brockett Horne from the People's Graphic Design Archive.
All right. Hi, everyone. This conference gathering is so cool. I'm just adding to the chorus of folks who feel honored to be here. Are you hearing me okay and seeing my screen share? Looks okay? Okay, cool. So I'm Brockett, and I'm speaking on and benefiting from the Massachusetts and Pawtucket lands on what is currently called Boston. I'm a designer and an educator, and today I'm representing the People's Graphic Design Archive. We are the first member of the nascent Letterform Archive digital collection, so it's a real joy to follow Menaja's presentation. And in my role as co-director of the People's Graphic Design Archive, I would like to best represent works from the communities here in this incredible gathering and also challenge my own thinking. And so I want to tell you a little bit about this. The People's Graphic Design Archive is a project that makes graphic design history more inclusive and more accessible. It's a crowdsourced virtual archive. There's no brick and mortar version, it's only digital. And it allows anyone to upload materials for the historical record, challenging other collections that are built only by those with academic training, special resources, large funding sources, anything like that. So I want to tell you a little bit about People's Graphic Design Archive, and then I want to share some challenges that we're facing about the complexities of indigeneity and design. And I'd love to discuss that further with you. So the People's Graphic Design Archive is new, and its practices, collections, and voices are still developing. We're really aiming to build an inclusive space, and we feel like we have an opportunity to avoid replicating some of the problems that exist with other archival spaces. The People's Graphic Design Archive has all different kinds of material, including finished projects, design process, photos, correspondence, interviews, all different kinds of file types too, from GIFs to PDFs to video. And I have some of those on the screen right now, and other archives as well. So that's an important part of our collection, is to point to other archives. We have a large team of collaborators, including Briar Levitt, Morgan Searcy, our founder, Louise Sandhouse, and advisor, Sadie Redwing. And we've been building this project for many years. Collaboration is messy, inefficient, infuriating, and the way forward, I'm convinced. So I'm confident that together we're building so much more powerful than I could do on my own. And all of those voices are essential. Our custom website that I have on the screen now launched on September 1st, so it's really new. But since then, the contributions have really grown exponentially. And today the users come from all over the world. And I think this is the most diverse and curious collection of graphic design that I know. The concept for the site isn't really to feel like a content aggregator like Pinterest or even a museum, but I'm hoping you feel like you're at the world's coolest garage sale, where there are tons of treasures that sort of expand your mind and encourage your imagination, beyond a narrow history of how we've defined design. So my favorite part of the site is the search by topics. And I think that will delight any curious researcher. So here we could search for any topic like year, location, or a search term like First Nations or Lakota, kinship, form line, syllabary, anything like that. For example, if you searched for alphabets, one of your find results might be this, which is the Quileute alphabet that Leo Vicente uploaded. Thank you, Leo. I hope you're on the call. And here's an upload that I could really imagine myself researching more about this alphabet, and in fact, using it in the courses that I teach, which would help me counter some of the dominant narratives that some of the other speakers have been challenging as well. My favorite uploads offer new items to the graphic design canon, and they encourage the opportunity for future research too. So if the People's Graphic Design Archive works, it will spur new scholarship, which includes new voices, new methods, new forms of dissemination. And I think that if we want new history, we have to have new tools. Like, we can't continue to work with the same tools. So a major focus right now is the upload experience. So, this is something that we've been working on a lot to try to improve the quality of the upload experience. This is where users can add items. We've worked with incredible designer Abby Chen, who also works at the Met, and Rob Meek, the developer for Fonts in Use. And we've tested this part of the archive. We're trying to find a sweet spot between making it simple and clear, but also collect as much information as we can. I know folks on this call are UX and UI designers, so maybe you can feel our pain, but we've been testing ways to kind of optimize this. And currently we're exploring possibilities with machine learning to kind of understand how machine learning and archives could overlap. So let's see. So I want to talk next, just 4 challenges that we're facing in building the platform. And I hope that we can talk about these. I'm sure this will relate to things that others on the panel will discuss. The first is the 10-year rule. So many museums and archives, and ours is included, have a rule that we only collect items that are 10 years or older, or made about things that happened over a decade ago. So the reason for this rule is to try to keep the archive from becoming a portfolio site, but it also gives a little bit of time for the interpretation of historical events. However, this rule really rules out a lot of recent stellar design work, such as land back movements, Dakota pipeline access protests, even Black Lives Matter, Me Too movements, a lot of the recent political discourse. And we know this work is really important, and we're trying to find a way to collect it as future history. And so even though our site is really about history, and I'm sharing some of the examples, our project's really about history, I'm showing some treasures on the screen now. Many projects that are happening now really help us feel continuity with history. They help us breathe it and live it. And I think that's so many of the projects that are presented at this conference. So I think for our archive to exist, it really depends on a relationship with contemporary practice. And NEBAN's Native Designers list is an enormous source of inspiration for future history. It includes both contemporary and historic designers. I don't think it's been shouted out enough yet at this gathering. So I think it's really important. And if someone doesn't mind to kind of drop this link in the chat for me, it would help. Bobby Joe recently said, let's give flowers to the people who inspire us while they are still alive to enjoy them. So NEBAN, I really want to shout out and celebrate this incredible resource that hopefully folks on the web know. Okay, the second challenge is that a crowdsourced archive will contain examples of cultural appropriation of Native and Indigenous works. It's still really important to collect and interpret these items, but our archive is crowdsourced. It's built by the people. So it's going to respond and represent what people collect. So it's definitely going to be part of it. And one kind of curious object that I hope there's more discussion about in the future is this Art Deco collection of Blackfeet portraits by the German-born and educated Winold Rees. This is from 1940. And the outer envelope is presented with kind of geometric, angular sans serif pattern motifs. And inside are a collection of portraits like these. And these are portraits of Blackfeet tribal elders. And at the time, they were called dignified. That was the word that Rees used to describe them. And we can understand how that term would crystallize if you compare this, say, to like the Cleveland Indian sports mascot from about the same time. However, these portraits really reveal Weiss's fascination with, as a European, and appreciation of the American West. And images like this have continued to circulate, right? They capture a certain time, a certain fixed place and time, but these images were so widely distributed that they sustain a kind of iconic romantic heroism that later found its way into advertising. So these celebrated portraits were even recently, like as recently as last week, on view at the Museum of the Plains Indian in Browning, Montana. So that, they're still being circulated. The third challenge that we have is that not all First Nations or Indigenous works are appropriate for mass audiences. So we really understand that some Indigenous and Native works aren't appropriate for collecting or sharing publicly. They're made for private, they're meant to be shared in private communities. And so as an educator, it's really important to respect this notion and to share with our students that not everyone has access to every piece of content. It's a challenge for us because the People's Graphic Design Archive is meant to be for all, but some pieces just shouldn't be shared in this context. And I think it's important for us to speak about audience and not assume that concepts of ownership in the settler state sort of apply to all circumstances. We have a lot of pieces that are really made for public consumption. They might be tourist materials or souvenirs to remember a certain experience, rather than those that have been made specifically by and for Native and Indigenous communities. And so from a graphic design perspective, this kind of iconography should be read with that audience in mind. And although not related to the images that I have on the screen now, I think that Native design practices have often been exploited for convenience and profit, particularly for the tourism industry. And we need to collect that, and we need to talk about that. All right, last is this idea that significant or Native Indigenous works are sometimes characterized as craft. So we know that significant Native design elements include narrative, storytelling, unconventional techniques, emphasis on process with materials, and those might be best represented in objects that aren't associated with graphic design. So said another way, we might find compelling iconography and narrative on a textile rather than in a logo design. And in my own practice and teaching, I'm really convinced that we might be defining graphic design in too narrow of a way. So on the screen now, I have two textile pieces, one by Daisy Togolchi on the left. Actually, my captions are reversed. I apologize on my screen right now. And then the other one, the black one, is a pictographic quilt by Rebecca Blackwater. And I think there's a lot can be informed. These can inform a lot about designing symbols, logos, and icons, among many other things. But we wouldn't find these if we were looking for that kind of stuff, right? We need to challenge what we're looking at and what we're calling design. So just to wrap up, I'm getting kind of to the end of my talk here. So I just wanted to invite you to participate. For this to succeed, we need you. We see the archive as useful for students and educators, but also designers at any stage of their career, and artists, collectors, historians, researchers. Anyone is welcome to use the archive. It's so easy to add. You need to make an account, which is really easy. We need you. You are the people. And we're hoping that we can build this together and kind of collectively decide what should be part of history. So tomorrow we're offering a workshop in the afternoon. It's at 4 p.m. and it's going to be led by Leo Vicenti. Thank you, Leo, for hosting this. And some of our archive staff, some of my colleagues will be on hand to support. And we'd love to really upload items that reflect all the things we've been talking about so far. So last, just thanks to all my collaborators. The screen has a long list of some of the folks. Thank you, Ksenia, Niben, and everyone on the call for holding this space, for learning and sharing with honesty, generosity, openness. I'm grateful for you.
Wow, this is like fantastic. I feel like, I've talked a lot about like, we need to be a part of things. We need to be part of the narratives. And this, like, I see this and I see like, there can be some very accelerated growth by all of us participating in this. And there's so much too, like when you're, I'm sure like some of us will have a poster from the 70s or the 80s, you have these things kind of like around sometimes and like in families and whatnot. And so like, I feel like this is a good chance to be able to show some of that, right? Thank you so much also for the shout out. That was really nice. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what you're all building with this. Appreciate, kind of like all of the concerns and seeing this as like a start for discussions. And I think, there's a lot of like hidden history, right? And this is a chance to talk about some of that more. So thank you so much. Really hope that some of the attendees can join for the workshop on Sunday. I think that this is like, I'm excited. I'm like starting to think my wheels are turning. I know some other archivists and I'm like, we could be putting stuff up here, Anyway, thank you, Brockett, for the great presentation. Super awesome. And next we're going to be hearing from Jim from the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center. Well, take it away, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Niben, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this really exciting event. So unfortunately, my talk starts at a darker place. So the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a very deeply troubling part of our shared history because it was a school specifically designed to destroy indigenous cultures. And the story has been told many different ways, but we can't stop telling it because it's really important that everyone understands what a really destructive and evil force was the boarding school intent. But it's also a really interesting lens through which to view forms of representation and resistance by the students and the teachers who were part of the system, who despite the system were still trying to preserve and share their own cultures. So the project itself started a little less than 10 years ago with the goal to digitize records about the school. And our first goal really was focused on the written record for living descendants of students to understand better what their ancestors' experience might have been like. But needless to say, you are capturing a little bit of everything. And so lots of other ways of viewing this history come together. And so, as you can imagine, when the school started, Richard Henry Pratt, of course, everyone's familiar with his name as being the founder of the school. He is really trying to destroy indigenous cultures thoroughly, does not want people to go back to their home communities and reservations. He wants the cultures to disappear. And so everything that they are being taught in the 1880s and 1890s is centered around a Euro-American Western perspective. And so here we have a photograph taken by Francis Benjamin Johnston in 1902, showing a traditional Western style art class that students are engaged in. But Pratt is ousted in 1904 after basically 25 years of running the school. And there are changes higher up the chain as well. So we welcome a new Commissioner of Indian Affairs by the name of Francis Loop. And Loop has this idea that while there should be education of Native Americans, there should not be a complete destruction of their cultures. And so you can see from the quote that was printed on a card some of his idea. And so a friend of his by the name of Mercer becomes the next superintendent of the Carlisle Indian School. And early in 1906, they hire Angel Decora to be a teacher of Native arts and crafts at the school. So this is a complete shift from the first period of the school's history under Pratt to now leaving a space for Native expression at the school. And so Angel Decora has her work cut out for her at the beginning because the schools have been so successful at destroying Native cultural sensibilities. And so that she talks about when she first arrives that a lot of the students she's trying to teach really need to be retaught some of their own traditional designs and work ways. Shortly after she arrives, they start building a new art studio. And this is, the studio gets named for Francis Loop here at the Carlisle Indian School site. And you can see in some of the early work then, some of the geometric designs and indigenous motifs that start to be added to the print work that goes on at the Carlisle Indian School. So Carlisle always had an active print shop, but it's only after Angel Decora arrives that you start to see the use of different design elements and motifs that have an indigenous mark. And so these are some examples of little 4x6 quotations that would be printed at the school with little moral messages and things. It's sort of like a Poor Richard's Almanac kind of idea, but you can start to see indigenous designs and motifs entering into the picture. And Sometimes you see the work signed. So in the commencement program on the left, you can see a student's name, TT Saul, class of '09, doing the design for that. The catalog on the right with the borders that are included, as well as the mark in the center. And we can start to see these particular blocks from the print center being reused in different ways. So if you look on the left, so here is a pamphlet of the Indian Arts and Crafts Department under Angel Decora's guidance. So that that image of a rug on the left, you might have recognized being used also in this other item. So, you know, again, it's a print shop. So in the interest of efficiency, they're going to be reusing a lot of the designs and the blocks that they have in their stock. But as Menaja mentioned, there's always the angle as well of commodification. And so this catalog goes through a lot of pages talking about the designs and, you know, authentic Indian arts and crafts made by students at the school, as well as some things which are really being imported from communities elsewhere in the United States to be sold at the Carlisle Indian School. So there's some Acoma Pueblo pottery. There are Navajo blankets that are not actually made at the school, but brought in for sale. And so this is basically a sales catalog. And at the end, it has, you know, price lists. And here you can see photographs of the kinds of things that were being produced at the school, or if they weren't produced on site by the students, they're being sold through the school. So this is, you know, 1907, 08, 09, somewhere in that area. So one always has to question then too the motives of people like Francis Loop, if it was just a financial motive that convinced him that it was important to teach Native American arts and crafts at Carlisle and to bring Angel Decora in. So the story gets further complicated when a person by the name of William Dietz enrolls at Carlisle in 1907. So that's him on the football team. And so Dietz and Angel Decora get married late in 1907. And he, in addition to helping with coaching and football, also becomes essentially the assistant art instructor. And they launch a new magazine format. They've had newspaper formats for years, but they launch a new magazine format of their school publication. And you can see Lone Star, William Lone Star Dietz has signed in the lower left corner on the cover. And so now you have his art being added, and you still see the advertising for the what is being produced at the Arts and Crafts department. And you see again these use of indigenous motifs through borders and things of that nature. So I've got a number of images of that magazine that show some of the different types of designs. And so we don't know exactly who was responsible for all of this design work. Presumably it was Angel and Lone Star together. That might have also been some of the work of the other students that were being trained in the Arts and Crafts department by Angel Decora. But the covers of the issues of the Red Man magazine are for the better part of 5 years. They are invariably the work of Lone Star himself. Now, what further complicates matters is the fact that Lone Star himself was an imposter. He was not Lakota, as Ogallala Lakota, as he claimed to be. He was an imposter who worked his way into a Native American identity. And so that raises questions for us looking at this archive of material of the Carlisle Indian School and the artistic representations that we find there, as to how we look at that, interpret that, how better we can understand who was involved in that work. And so, as I mentioned, about 5 years for Lone Star to be working with Angel at the school. And then in 1915, they both make exits, but at different times. Angel leaves Carlisle to the northeast, and Lone Star Dietz heads to the northwest. But you still see some of the design continuing after their departure. So the Carlisle arrow on the right-hand side takes on more of a newspaper format again, but the design elements in the header and elsewhere in the paper. And then the issue of the Red Man no longer has large illustrations by Lone Star Dietz, but instead includes again, just certain motifs and design elements, which will be reused throughout the remaining years of the Carlisle Indian School. The school closes in 1918. Angel Decorah and Lone Star basically are separated for several years before they get a divorce in 1918. And I stumbled across this letter just a couple of weeks ago, very conveniently. On the left is a letter. You can see I'm an old ex-student of Carlisle and would like to know if you can favor me by sending some Indian designs for fobs and hat bands, and also some initials with designs worked. So looking for an alphabet, basically, and let me know the price. This is a former Onondaga student who had been at the school from 1904 to 1909. So he would have been there when Angel Decorah first arrived and started the arts and crafts department. And you can see on the right-hand side, the reply then basically is just to send copies of the school magazines, which feature those kinds of designs through the years. So, the Digital Resource Center, we continue to digitize material and add it on a regular basis. There is a lot of material at the local Cumberland County Historical Society, who's a partner on the project, and they're just down the road. So there is more work by Angel Decorah as well as Lone Star Dietz that has not yet been uploaded. There's also original student artwork, ledger drawings and things of that nature that were done by earlier students at the school. So there's a lot of work yet to go to add more material that is searchable and discoverable. But we're looking forward to what else we can discover from this archive as we continue our work. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Jim. Really great presentation, incredibly informative. And I think it's a good reminder to everybody to try to be aware of context, because I think, as we're, as Native designers are looking to older work to, perhaps inspire our own or to understand the past, it's good for us to really have a better understanding of what some of these things are coming from, like what the context is. As Jim talked about, there's some really big complexities in the fact that, you had a fraudulent person, shaping things, right? So Thank you again, Jim. This was great. There's some questions coming in, and since some of them are directed toward you, I'm going to go ahead and jump into those now. Well, the first question, are the archives of samples shown available to students and educators? And you kind of answered that it was like a combination of, yes, some of this is available and some of it's to come. If you wanted to elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, the website is fully open to anybody. It's a totally open archive of material digitized largely from the National Archives and the Cumberland County Historical Society. The photography is also from the National Anthropological Archives. But yes, there's a lot of material yet to be added. We've digitized about 300,000 pages of material so far, but work is ongoing, and people often ask when the project will be over, and I always tell them never, because there's always more material out there, and we're always searching for more material that shows the fuller student story. Right now, I will be honest, right now when you go to the site, the overwhelming majority of material is government documentation. So we're more and more looking for the indigenous voice to add to counter that narrative.
Yeah, much more work to be done. Well, thank you for getting that, showing us behind the scenes and the kind of like the process. There's another question we have from Tim Neal. Oscar House stated mapping modernisms. The art generated in these types of schools were self-contained melting pots where the students basically develop their own ideas as opposed to contributing to the continuing of traditional crafts and artwork. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that, I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but I think that is a fair representation. When you look at Angel Decora's own comments about starting to teach Native arts and crafts at Carlisle, she talks about the need to basically teach a little, she's bringing in lots of different cultures because the students that are there represent different cultures across the continent. So, so students are going to be in many ways, I think, sort of mashing up those different symbols and ideas and cultural ways in all of their thinking, and they're going to bring a whole new sensibility to the work that they do. Interestingly, early on too, Angel Decora mentions in one of her reports that she would like to talk about the ability for students to copyright their work. So, I mean, that just shows too how she recognizes the importance, in the culture in which they're now thrust, how ownership is important, so that the work that students are creating will be able to be theirs, uniquely theirs. And I think that's probably why everything that Lone Star Dietz does always has his signature on it as well.
Thank you so much for that explanation. There's another comment from Tim, and this is to the entire panel. And, what are your thoughts on how you would contribute to the conversation of OCAP, which stands for ownership, control, access, and possession of content? And if anybody wants to take that on, feel free. Maybe Brockett, maybe you could speak to that because you're having all this information coming in, right? And that's a lot of copyrights we're looking at, right?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I feel like I can only address this from a small perspective, but People's Graphic Design Archive doesn't claim to own any of the copyright of any of the materials on our site. When one joins, I hope you all made an account, but when you make an account, you'll agree that the person who's uploading the content is responsible for protecting it. So I think that's unique to our crowdsourced archive, but it would be different for a different archive, I think.
One way that I'd like to address that question is that one thing that we like to do is work directly with artists, like when we're collecting work or acquiring work, being in conversation directly with the artists that the work is coming from, rather than going through like other avenues, like going through like third parties or other sources like that. Like whenever it's possible, especially working with contemporary artists and living artists right now, I've always found that the most effective way to do this is to just be in conversation with them and let them have complete agency and control over where they think their work should live, like where it should exist. And also like by paying artists directly, like rather than going through other avenues, like it's more of like a direct line of contact with those artists. And once the work is like within the collection or within the archive, there's always opportunities to expand on it through programming and have there be opportunities where the artists are able to talk about their work in the context it was created, as well as in the context of other pieces. So talking about it in conversation with other things, I feel like keeps pushing the idea that this is like, it's like a living piece of work. It's a living, breathing piece of work. It doesn't just like start and end at a certain point. The context can keep evolving and it can keep changing. So these are some practices that we like to employ.
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's about like communities having a voice, like, it's like come up about how things can be extractive or exploitative, but by involving the community, it can dismantle some of these like, institutional practices. Kind of dovetailing with that, there's a question from Bobby Joe Smith, and he's curious about how your archiving practice might be similar to or diverge from Indigenous stewardship principles. If any of you want to expand on that further. I know it's kind of a big question.
I mean, Bobby Joe, I love this question. Both of these are so provoking for me. Thank you. And please, like Menaja, Jim, and Neben, jump in at any point. I think like something that's kind of interesting for design is that so many of the things that we're collecting, there are multiples of, or that they have been circulated in a variety of ways, right? So particularly with graphic design pieces, it's often hard to identify like one particular representation. Menaja shared 2 different print runs of the Wigwam Stories book, for example. I see that sometimes challenging from a precious object or a unique object. I don't know if that's a satisfactory like response. I'd be curious to hear what you think about that. But I think this is something we're particularly challenged to do because of the medium that we're working with or collecting.
I really love this question, and just like, I guess, some thoughts and reflections on it. I don't know if I have like a direct answer to that or anything, but I think like one thing that I was thinking about, even in regards to the presentation and so many of these pieces, again, is like, what are these pieces made of? What is like the purpose, like what is like the lifespan of a material itself? Like, is our purpose to try to like immortalize it or try to make it like so that it's completely preserved and is going to outlive us? Or does it kind of like go through the, like, does it like weather the elements, or like how does the object itself evolve as time goes by? Like, so many pieces are like, they're not necessarily created to be archived or to like live for forever, I guess, like whatever forever means. But like, so many pieces are made with organic matter. They're made with like paper, like made with matter that like will decompose over time or will like, I guess, degrade over time. So I think that's something that we think about a lot in like restoration as well. Like, I feel like the most that we can do is try to provide like a safe home to these places, to these pieces, for as long as they're meant to last, like we can't really like play God and try to like preserve something that's like completely falling apart. And I feel like the degradation process of materials also talks to like the story of them, like it's not really about like preserving this thing forever and ever in its like immaculate, pristine form, but like the older a piece gets, like once the paper starts yellowing, once like the binding starts falling apart a little bit, this kind of speaks to us about like the age of the material and like when it comes from. And it's with archiving also, I think it's interesting to think about the technologies that we have now and about how like things can take different forms. Like we're able to still like document and archive pieces at a certain point of time, maybe in a digital manner, you know, so we still have like snapshots of what the piece looked like throughout time while still having the physical piece that may not be in the exact form that it was at when we first got it. So yeah, those are just some thoughts that I have.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like you're letting it kind of take on its own life. I think one thing that's really interesting with the technology available now, and what I think all of you really are expressing is like not this idea of like hoarding, but it's like, how can we share information? How can we make things accessible? And, you know, even like critiquing some of where, you know, archives have come from, right? Or these different institutions. So I really appreciate, you know, that, because I feel like, you know, we're inheriting certain situations. And it's kind of like, well, how can we ethically move forward with what is there, you know? Yeah, so I definitely appreciate it. We have, I think, just like maybe 2 more minutes. So if there's anything you guys wanted to share or elaborate on, or if there's any other questions, please type them in. Or even if you guys want to ask each other a question, please do. Well, it seems like we're not really getting anything more, but I really appreciate the time that you all have given today. It's been incredibly informative, and I'm like really encouraged to see the work that everybody's doing, you know, to be honest. And, you know, shout out to Jim. Like years ago when I was working on an article for AIGA about Angel Decora, Jim had, you know, very like quickly like sent me some stuff, you know, for my article. And, you know, I think that is really great to have these sorts of relationships, you know, and accessibility like this. And, you know, again, Jim, I really appreciate you. I didn't respond to this email. I was like, oh, I'll send you the thing. And then I was like, oh, wait, I'm looking at the old emails, you know, oops. But, you know, I appreciate your willingness to, you know, give of your time, and, you know, the same to you, Menaja, and also Brockett. Like, again, really exciting to see the work and to see relationships being built in a good way. You know, thank you so much. I'm just taking a quick peek at the comments. There's a big message came in, but okay, I don't think it was a question for everybody. But again, thank you all so much. Thanks for being here. And, you know, I guess onwards, and, you know, good luck on all of your projects. Yeah, miigwech.